I now recognize Representative Adam Kinzinger of Illinois for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for being here and spending this time. It's very important. You know, watching some of this debate, I think it's important to remind people, yes, the Trump administration failed in the setup, and I think the Biden administration absolutely failed in the execution of this. I also want to make it clear, Mr. Secretary, we support the members of the State Department and their heroic action in the evacuation. I think the broader point is they never should have been put in a place where they had to act heroically. We found ourselves many times, we talk about Bagram and leaving that, and I think that's important to point out. But there was also moments where the U.S. military, with the 6,000 people that we sent in, could have defended Kabul proper. It was clear that the Taliban were not intending to move into Kabul as early as they did. But we put them in a position where they had to act heroically. And we shouldn't ask that of our State Department employees, even though we appreciate that they did. I also think it's important to point out, you know, there's a lot of blame of the Afghan military. And I certainly, as a military man myself, wish that the Afghan military would have helped. But keep in mind, prior to that, there were assessments coming out that it was only a matter of time. Maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's a year, until the whole place collapsed. You know, we had built a military in our own image that relied on air power, that relied on logistics. And then we pulled our logistic and air power support from the Afghan military. And as they received night letters from the Taliban saying, we're going to kill your family because the United States is vacating, they're leaving you. It's, to me, as much as I would love for them to have stayed and taken a stand heroically, I don't know many even of our allies' militaries that frankly could have stood in those conditions in that kind of an onslaught. Let me ask you, though, Mr. Secretary, you know, you talk a little about the Taliban legitimacy, and we're going to see how they act. I want to ask you a question, because I'm not sure where that changed. At the beginning of all of this, we were talking about building a worldwide coalition to not recognize the Taliban, and all of a sudden this is on the table. Is the Taliban the legitimate government of Afghanistan? And if not, would you consider what the Taliban have done in Afghanistan to be a coup d'etat?
First, let me just start by thanking you for your strong words in support of the men and women of the State Department. I very much appreciate them and appreciate you saying them. Second, with regard to the Taliban and your question, it is the de facto government of Afghanistan. Those are just the facts. And
I don't mean to interrupt, but I need to. Has there been any discussion of an Afghan government in exile, vice president, even if the president had left? Is there any discussion of that? Because this, to me, appears to be an armed military coup against the legitimate elected government of Afghanistan.
Congressman, I will certainly look to see what the lawyers say. From where I sit, this is the product, alas, of one side getting the upper hand in a civil war.
Let me ask a couple of questions here on something too about that. So if we look at the list of new key players in the regime, we have the current prime minister who was deputy during the 9/11 attacks, the current deputy prime minister who served as #2 defense official during the 9/11 attacks, the current foreign minister who's your counterpart was the Minister of Culture and Information during the 9/11 attacks. And we have designated terrorists in key positions like those that are responsible for preventing Afghanistan from becoming a safe haven and terror once again. So we look at that list and we see those individuals who not only defended al-Qaeda, but have committed crimes against women and vulnerable populations. And I think anybody would look at that and say, this is the same regime that failed to hand over Osama bin Laden 20 years ago. But let me just ask you, have these individuals committed to denouncing al-Qaeda, to denouncing the Haqqani network, and ensuring that they will execute any attacks against them should they try to organize in their territory?
Well, in the agreement that was secured by the previous administration, the Taliban, now represented by these individuals, made commitments not to allow Afghanistan to be used as a launching ground for externally directed terrorism, whether by al-Qaeda or by anyone else. The big question now, and you're right to point to it, is whether they will make good on that commitment. But of course, we can't and won't rely on them to do that, even as we insist that they do.
Let me ask you too. Thank you, and I'm sorry to cut you off. Just
no, please go ahead.
Points. Number one, we absolutely have to be executing any attack against al-Qaeda that we can, where we see them form. And secondarily, because I'm running out of time, let me stress to you the importance of State Department working hand in hand in a public and private way with these NGOs made up of former veterans that are doing stuff that unfortunately the government can no longer do. And let me encourage you to give them top cover and work with them to provide the assets necessary to get these people out. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I yield back.
Let me just say, I really appreciate you saying that and putting the spotlight on that, because veterans groups are doing remarkable work. We're in close contact with them. I met with about 75 veterans organizations and groups virtually about a week ago. We followed up with a number of other meetings, and we deeply appreciate the work that many veterans on this committee, as well as organizations, are doing. And we're looking to work even more closely together on that. Thank you.
Good news.